our speaker.
So thanks, Judge. So we have with us today from NACO, Mark Rotaco, who's the head of their government affairs. Mark, thanks for being with us today. You and I have not had an opportunity to speak, so I'm kind of throwing you out there to the wolves. We didn't arrange how this was going to go, but I'll tell you that normally our roundtable is a free forum. I would imagine that you have some introductory remarks you'd like to make, and then we'll just open it up to our members for question. Members, if you have a question, if you can show yourself on the camera and give us a wave, or you can send a message through the meeting app, and we'll recognize that. I can tell you that we already have several questions that our staff has received, and so when at the opportune time, I'll get on and ask those. But otherwise, Mark, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me okay?
I'm here in this room.
Excellent. Well, thank you all. Again, it's an honor to be here. My name is Mark Rotaco. I'm the Director of Government Affairs here at the National Association of Counties in Washington, D.C., and I so appreciate the invitation to be here today. And of course, thank you to Chairman and Judge Sebastia and Vice Chair Whitley. I don't see him on, but obviously an active NACO member. Hello, Judge. And want to jump right into it. If I can have the ability to share my screen, perhaps I can do a couple slides. But as we're waiting for that, I just wanted to talk about the American Rescue Plan, as the judge had said prior to this conversation. The American Rescue Plan, as you all know, and hopefully you'll be seeing a slideshow, is an historic investment in America's counties, including all counties in Texas. One of the real amazing features of this law, which was meant to respond to the COVID-19 emergency, was that every county in Texas is eligible for funds based on population. And of course, including every county represented here today. Since you want to make this an open forum, I am certainly open to that. So while I'm talking, just chime in and interrupt if you have questions. I see there's a chat here. I'll try to monitor the chat as well. But I think what I want to do, and again, since these are our largest and most engaged counties, I would assume our vast majority of you have already applied for your funds. So I'm going to skip through the how to apply for your fund slide, but maybe if there's a question on that, I can go back to it. But long story short, you need to apply through Treasury's portal for your share of the American Rescue Plan's funds. And last Monday was kind of a momentous day in the life of this momentous bill, because Treasury put out a list of resources that I strongly recommend each of you read, because it is the rules of the road for how you invest this money. And at the top level, again, this is a historic investment in local governments. It's also really interesting because Treasury has given us years to spend this money. So it doesn't need to be spent in this fiscal year. It needs to be obligated by December 31st, 2024. But not even spent until 2026. So there's a really long tail on these funds, which again make it unique. There are, in addition to the direct $65.1 billion in funds that are going to all counties in America based on population, there are other pots of money in this bill that will flow to counties. And NACO has resources to help you understand where each pot is going, but I would encourage you, as one of the sort of best practices in dealing with these funds, to coordinate with other levels of government. Each city in your county, each municipality in your county will be receiving its own pot of money. The state, of course, will be receiving its own pot of money. And of course, there's eligible uses that are the same for each. And therefore, we think that coordination is really important so that the money is spent as efficiently as possible. So this screenshot you see here, and I will send these slides around, has several important resources, and I would actually read them in the order that they are on the screen. There's the interim final rule, which is the actual text of the rule and the law in which you must comply with. There's a fact sheet that summarizes that interim rule, which is 151 pages. There's like a 3-page fact sheet that summarizes the 151 pages. There's a continuously evolving FAQ document that I read several times, and they did anticipate a lot of the questions that our counties would be getting. So that FAQ document, as well as the quick reference guide, and of course the county fund allocations, are all very important documents that I would suggest that you look at. Another high-level overview of the rule as you're reading it. So again, it's 151 pages. I don't usually recommend this, but I would recommend you skip to page 130, because that's where things start to get actual. You know, there's 129 pages of lead up to about 20 pages of here's what you can and can't do. And it's important to decode some of the language in this 151 page interim final rule. They use words which are not frequent in regulatory documents. They say shall means you shall. It's mandatory. They also use words like may and encourage. Treasury encourages you to develop broadband at this speed. They encourage you to invest in certain areas of your community. You don't have to. They want you to, but it is not a requirement of the rule. And baked into this shall, may, and encourage language that you see throughout the rule is this idea of proportionality and consistency. The rule is very broad. It allows you to invest in extremely broad ways, which again, I think will be transformational for our local governments. But the principle of having it be proportional to either your revenue loss, proportional to the impact of COVID on your community, proportional to the negative economic impacts of COVID on your community, and consistent, meaning we're not going to single out very, very small areas of our community for outsized investments. And that's where it gets a little bit complicated, and we can go through it a little bit more detail later. But again, on page 130, you get really important definitions such as covered benefits, covered period, eligible workers, defines general revenue, defines a pension fund, all really important definitions. Here are some key dates for you. And again, I know this is a round table. I know it's a back and forth. So I'm looking at a screen that I can't necessarily see if people have hands up or anything. So please interrupt me if you have questions or want to chime in. But here are some really important dates. And let me single out a couple that are really important for this group. I believe all but 3 counties present today are above 250,000 in population. Those particular counties have an extra level of reporting requirements to Treasury. They have a recovery plan performance report that's due. And the first one is due relatively soon, on August 31st. But starting from the top, January 27th, 2020 is sort of the retroactive date for the declaration of the public health crisis. So when you see public health crisis in the bill, it either refers to January 27th or March 3rd, 2021. 2 very important dates in the bill. The declaration of the general nationwide COVID emergency, January 27, 2020, the date for which you can begin billing your expenses and costs related to COVID that you can charge to this funds is over a year later, March 3rd, 2021. And then subsequently, you see dates that are coming up this summer, reporting deadlines, and the special report for large counties. And then December 31st, 2020, and then periodically thereafter, I should say, between 2021 and 2024. And then December 31st, 2024, recovery funds must be obligated. And President Gary Moore of NACO will often say, you have a really long time to spend this money. And so it should, of course, be thoughtful. And this 3-year timeline will give people a opportunity to really wisely invest this money. And I should say that December 31st, 2024 deadline is the date in which funds must be obligated, not spent. It's 2 years later that the money must be spent. So you need to enter into your contracts. You need to obligate the funds by that 2024 date and spend them by the 2026 date. The interim final rule lists several types of eligible expenses. You see them on the screen. I'll go into them in a bit of detail here. And this is, of course, where most of the questions lie. So again, chime in anytime. But the first big area of eligible use, which I presume many counties will tap into very quickly and have the most percentage of their funds spent in this category, I would guess, are COVID mitigation, PPE, vaccines, testing, infrastructure improvements, capital investments to congregate facilities that slow the spread of COVID-19, public health workforce, and those sorts of things. Medical expenses as well. The interim final rule, and this is one of the sort of should we encourage you to, but you don't have to areas, is that there's a big focus in the interim final rule on behavioral health. So new or advanced state and local government services that are needed to meet mental health, substance use, and other behavioral health needs. Of course, we know that these problems in our community were exacerbated during COVID-19, and that's why the interim final rule allows these American Rescue Plan funds to be spent on behavioral health care. And then again, of course, public health and safety staff. Perhaps the broadest category of eligible uses is to address negative economic impacts from COVID. And these are incredibly broad. So assistance to unemployed workers, job training, food, housing, and even cash assistance to households, which again should be reasonable, I guess, or proportionate is the word I have here. Survivor benefits for COVID-19 victims, and then assistance for small businesses in your communities, loans, grants, in-kind assistance, helping small businesses mitigate COVID, allows you to rehire staff, replenish state unemployment insurance funds, which is a question we get a lot, and then give direct and targeted assistance to impacted industries such as tourism, travel, hospitality. Tourism, travel, and hospitality are the 3 industries that are listed in the final rule, but there is even a note there, and especially in the FAQ document, that is not an exhaustive list. So essentially any impacted industry, retail, there's in my community, Washington, D.C. area, many sort of indoor play centers have shut down due to COVID, and that would, of course, be an impacted industry. This is in the sort of should category, or you can category, which is to provide equity-focused services. And those equity-focused services are listed on the screen. There is several mentions of affordable housing and to support individuals experiencing homelessness. I see your question, Mr. Jones, in the chat. I'm going to get to it in a second. It's about lost revenue. I can actually even skip ahead to that. This is where the rule sort of splits in 2. So, and this is where it gets a bit complicated as well. You can spend these dollars on the things that I just laid out and more, but they are prescribed. However, if you're a county that has lost revenue as a result of COVID, there is a whole other list of things or an additional list of things that you can do with this money. And it boils down to, first of all, calculating your lost revenue. There's a couple ways to do it that is kind of mathy, and I won't necessarily do the math equation here. This slide lays it out. But first you calculate your lost revenue. There's two different ways to calculate your lost revenue. But let's assume you do have lost revenue. Lost revenue, of course, defined as enterprise-wide. So almost any stream of county revenue, to the extent that it was lost, can be used to provide any government service. So if you lost $1 million of revenue, you can use $1 million to provide any government service. So different from the prescriptive lists of things you can buy or provide assistance to and use the money for, if you have lost revenue, that opens up almost anything else. And so that was a question in the chat that I wanted to answer before I just kept talking. So the question was, I'll read it. It was, hotel revenues, can funds be used to replace hotel and motel tax revenues that were lost? The specific answer to that question is no. But to the extent that you had those lost revenues, you can use that amount of lost revenues to do the things that you would have done with those revenues. Does that answer your question, sir? Or should I go more into that? I'll give you a second to. Okay, great. I see it in the chat. Trying to keep my eyes in a couple places here, so sorry if I miss anything. This is a overview of what a couple of things I talked about and a couple of things that I want to talk about. So we are on number 3. So we talked about supporting public health response. We talked about addressing the negative impacts of COVID, and we talked about replacing public sector revenue loss. There's a few other things you can do. Can offer premium pay to those who have borne the greatest health risk because of their service in critical industries. So you can do two things in this premium pay section. And it's up to an additional $13 an hour. You can give grants to businesses and industries that provide essential services or have essential workers, and those essential workers are defined in the interim rule. Or you can give premium pay to any county employee. So it's private employees and employers who are doing essential work, or anyone providing a county service in person. It excludes those who are teleworking. So I'll monitor the chat for questions about that. But then the last two eligible uses are victories, quite honestly, for counties, because it's something that NACO really pushed for. I know is so important in county governments are water, sewer infrastructure, and broadband infrastructure. I'm going to get to the pension issue in a second. These funds can be used for investments in water and sewer, consistent with the state revolving fund program and the state drinking water and the clean water revolving fund program. So if a project is eligible under those programs, they're eligible here. And for broadband infrastructure as well. The rule is very broad, pardon the pun, on broadband. It says you could basically use this money to develop broadband infrastructure, period. We would like you to create broadband infrastructure that's equitable and has 100 megabyte upload and download speeds, and you should do these things with the money. But at the end of the day, it's a very broad allowance for investing in infrastructure. Let me answer the question in the chat. Here are the things that you can't do. Pension funds. Funding cannot be used for deposits into defined benefit funds. However, Treasury defines a deposit as an extraordinary contribution to a pension fund for the purpose of reducing an unfunded liability. It's very important. When the bill came out, it said you can't put any of this money into pensions. And NACO and others, and I'm sure many of you said, well, hold on a minute, that would cause us to have to create basically two payroll systems, where in the first payroll system, we pay an employee everything but their pension fund. And then the other payroll system, we make a contribution to their pension fund. And this interim final rule very clearly, and thank goodness, it allows recipients to use funds for routine payroll contributions to pensions of employees whose wages and salaries are eligible. So if you're using these funds to support your public health and public safety workers, you can use the funds for their entire salary and wages, including their pension. So there's a broad ineligibility for pension liabilities, but not for routine pension contributions. Was there a question? I'm sorry. That's a good question. The question in the chat is, does what I just said include incremental payroll pension contributions as a result of premium pay? I would imagine so. But that is a good question that we'll get back to you on. And I'm going to show at the end of this slideshow how to ask those more complicated questions and how we are asking Treasury those questions. We kind of have a system with Treasury to ask those very good but very detailed questions. There's other restrictions on number 2 here. Funding debt services, legal settlements, or judgments. The second 2, we're basically okay with. The first one we want to really talk to Treasury on, because a lot of those debt service obligations we would argue, are government services, and therefore want to kind of talk to Treasury about what exactly they mean by debt services. The second bullet there, deposit into rainy day funds or financial reserves, strictly prohibited in the rule. And then this bolded bullet, the third bullet under number 2, the non-federal match requirement. And this is something that some members of Congress would really like to see changed, especially in communities that, like those on the phone, that do lots of work jointly with our federal partners. They put the non-federal match up to many of these programs. And so the idea that you couldn't use these funds for the non-federal match, especially if you're using them to make up for lost revenue, is something that I think Congress would want to take a look at. So that third bullet under item number 2 is something that we would like to work on, and there might be a change down the line. And then what's limited to states, so again, has nothing to do with counties, but is limited to states, and there's litigation on this right now, but states can't basically purposely reduce their net revenue to make up for the fact that they got this money from the American Rescue Plan. I'm going to read the 2 questions in the chat now. Give me a second. Okay, let me take the second one from Andrea first. So can you speak to capital improvements, increased jail capacity, or social distancing? Yes. For the second one, certainly. You can make capital improvements, and I'm going to try to find the slide, so give me a moment. You can make capital improvements, including HVAC, social distancing, space. You can add a new wing to jails or health facilities or other congregate facilities to increase social distancing. You can use this money for capital improvements to increase jail capacity if increasing the jail capacity is in response to COVID. So if you're increasing the jail capacity to give staff more space or greater social distancing, then absolutely. Question before that was, can funds be used to build courthouses or road and bridge infrastructure? Again, it can be used to improve courthouses, to help mitigate the spread of COVID-19, such as adding space, improving the HVAC, maybe creating a new entryway that would increase social distancing. It can't be used currently to build a courthouse. And one thing that we want to talk to Treasury about, Commissioner, is whether counties can do a cost-benefit analysis in terms of, well, it would actually be cheaper for me to build a new building than it would be to expand the current building. And so in that case, in that rare case, could I build the new building as opposed to retrofit an old one? So in general, there was a two-part question. The question was, can funds be used to build courthouses or roads and bridges? The answer is not currently to build a courthouse, certainly to improve a courthouse and respond to COVID. And then on the roads and bridges question, generally no. Generally no. However, if building that road and bridge is seen in your particular county as a government service, you could use these funds to the extent to which you had lost revenue to invest in those infrastructure projects. So if you had $10 million of lost revenue, which would be a lot, you could use $10 million for any government service. And in this case, the road or bridge could be considered a government service. Now, where it gets a little tricky is, maybe I should be on this slide for my general discussion. Where it gets a little tricky is, you see number 2 there, address negative impacts, economic impacts of COVID. If in addressing the negative economic impacts of COVID, the lack of maintenance on a road or the overuse of a road or bridge or whatever it might be was a negative economic impact of COVID, then the answer would be yes. Road and bridge, though, is a tricky category, and I would certainly, before you make a major investment in those things, reach out to Treasury directly or work through us to make sure that it falls under one of these categories. If you have no lost revenue, those types of things get a little bit trickier. The last question from the judge here is, how about capital improvements for climate-controlled warehouse to store critical supplies in the event of emergency? I would say almost absolutely yes. Especially if that emergency would be related to preventing the spread of COVID-19 in some future situation. But to the extent to which the heart of your question, Judge, is about the climate-controlled aspect of it, then yes, because the rule specifically talks about HVAC, air circulation, and other environmental quality of air uses. What's giving me a little bit of pause there, Judge, on that question is the disaster perhaps like a hurricane type disaster? I'm not sure. That might be more of a tenuous link to COVID than something that if you were storing, for instance, PPE in that warehouse. So that's one that maybe we should talk a little bit more about. It's an interesting one. Now, if there is an existing warehouse that you want to expand to combat future pandemics, for instance, by storing PPE or otherwise providing perhaps emergency beds or something like that, that would definitely be an eligible use. Yeah, PPE, water, MREs, those all seem to be within the spirit of number one, the public health response. So we actually get a lot of questions like this. And, it seems like the spirit of the rule is like, yes, to these tenuously or tangentially linked COVID expenses. But I don't think it would hurt to just basically get confirmation on some of these very specific projects. But Judge, as soon as as soon as you say PPE there, I think that checks the box. I'm looking at a question now regarding mental health facilities. Is it undersized with newly expected social distancing quarantine? Is this eligible? Yes. Yes. I think this is even, I have the FAQ in front of me and I won't read it for you word for word, but this is basically the example of the capital investment you can make, which is improve social distancing and to stop the spread of COVID-19. And so again, I would point you back to this page. Oh, oops, sorry. I'd point you back to this page, this FAQ here. I'm hesitant to click on it because I think it will stop my slideshow, but these resources are on NACO.org and they're on Treasury's state and local presentation as well. Let me go to just two other issues while more questions are pouring in. There is a very, very significant difference between the CARES Act, which you all, or some of you, maybe half of you were direct recipients of, and this bill. Very key difference when it comes to public health and safety payroll. The CARES Act basically had a blanket presumption that anybody who was involved in public health and safety would be eligible for payroll support because by virtue of their job, they were substantially dedicated to mitigating and responding to COVID-19. This interim final rule says that you can cover their payroll to the extent to which the employee's time was dedicated to responding to COVID-19. So, and you don't have to go pay, timesheet by timesheet. You can be department by department. But so, for instance, Parks and Rec. Under the CARES Act, if your Parks and Rec people became testing site, directors, that was a broad presumption that their entire payroll could be covered using CARES Act. In this one, same idea, department level, but if for Parks and Rec generally only half their time is spent directing people at testing sites, but the other half of their time is in their normal non-COVID jobs, then only half of their payroll could be covered. Very important distinction. I'm going to send out this slideshow, but I think I already covered this broadband. And I see a question in the chat, so let me make sure I'm not missing anything. Sorry. Are counties taking on broadband access in innovative ways using recovery funds? Thank you for that question. And before I answer that about broadband, we on NACO.org, if you go to NACO.org/coronavirus, you're going to see this blue box here. You click on that, and that takes you to a form where you can put in your question, some of these a little bit more complicated questions. We have a team of people here who are talking to Treasury every day, including myself. The intergovernmental partnership between NACO and Treasury has never been stronger. We will get you an answer to those questions, and asking that question would really help us show Treasury what counties are asking to help them perfect their final rule. So I would, as a service to our members, I would point you to this ask a question box. And now let me answer that broadband question. The question was, are counties basically using, are counties making investments in broadband in innovative ways? The answer to that question is absolutely yes. And the way that we're harnessing those stories is in this green box, share your story. And we know that counties are going to use this money in very innovative ways. Counties are probably best positioned to respond to the needs of our residents and transform our communities for the better. And we want to harness those stories about broadband and about everything else. And so sharing your story with us would help us disseminate those best practices. But for instance, to answer your question, Gabriella, in the chat, we know that counties are going to build mobile hotspots. They're going to support students who have reduced broadband access during the pandemic. And they're going to do what we call the sort of middle mile infrastructure for broadband. Middle mile meaning, you know, obviously a private company is going to deliver the broadband, and the tower itself would probably not be constructed by the county in many cases, but it could if you're in a state that allows that. But, you know, those sort of middle uses of broadband are the innovative ways we think that broadband money is going to be spent. There's a very longish, for me, question in the chat, Mr. Chapman, and I'm not sure I can read it and quickly talk at the same time. Let me answer that one offline. From Will Jones, can you speak to how this affects the taxes we levy? No, not at all. So remember that prohibition on tax policy was for the state. If the question is, can you provide tax rebates or tax support to your residents? Yes, you can. Do a property tax rebate. You can do a cash check to every resident. But the prohibition on cutting your taxes or otherwise meddling with your tax policy only applies to the state, not the county government. The question about the risk pool, I'm not sure. Maybe if Andrea can get me a copy of this chat, we'll get all of these questions into our database, and I can get you a good answer on that. I'm sorry to be reading and talking at the same time. On the question here is another related courthouse question. Our historic courthouse will be mostly vacated in a year. Can we use American Rescue funds to renovate the facility to make it safe for new users to occupy, e.g. new HVAC, new space configurations? Absolutely, yes. Next question, are cities able to or permitted to transfer funds for small businesses to their county for distribution monitoring in the same manner which CARES Act funds were previously handled? From Ms. Maloney, yes, there are intergovernmental transfers allowed. You can transfer this money to a nonprofit. States can transfer money to you. You could transfer money to the state, although we probably want to talk to you about that first. Cities within a county can transfer money between each other. So broadly, yes, on the transfer question. From Wendy, we will, oh, sorry, that's not a question. Can a county do a property tax rebate based on equity and not across the board? for Ms. Ramirez? I don't know. I'm not sure about that one. We'd have to look at the interim final rule on the portions about equity and focus on what I assume in this case would be focus on low income households. Probably yes, but I don't want to say anything definitively. And thank you for sending me the chat. I only have 9 more minutes here, and I want to talk about any other questions. And it looks like my slideshow's over, but I'm gonna stop sharing. Hopefully now you just see me. All of these topics are going to be discussed at our annual conference in Washington, D.C., which is taking place on July 9th through July 12th. We will have Treasury officials there. Of course, I will be there along with my team of folks who, again, are talking to Treasury almost every day. And we will be focused very, very much so at our annual conference this July 9th in Washington, D.C. on these issues. So I would put in a plug for that. Any other questions that have come up? Let me kind of breeze through my slides off screen here to make sure I didn't forget anything that I wanted to talk about in the intervening 9 minutes. But I think that's it. Unless there are any other questions, I think I pretty much covered it all, and you're probably sick of my voice at this point. But I just would again put another plug into the Ask Us a Question feature on NACO.org. Let me give you my personal email now. Maybe I can just put it in the chat. Email me directly, and I'll have my staff answer these complicated questions. For our NACO members and our partnership with you all, happy to answer these questions. We are in Washington, D.C., and are talking to these federal officials every day. So I just want to thank you all for having me. And I also want to thank you all for the incredible work that you've done during this crisis. I'm somewhat new to county government. I came to NACO about a year ago. From Capitol Hill, I worked in the United States Senate for over a decade, and I have been truly awed by the work that county officials have done in responding to this once-in-a-lifetime crisis. And now I think we have a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity through this bill to make our communities stronger for the next pandemic, safer, and certainly more vibrant in the future. So thank you again. I couldn't be happier to be here today, and I really appreciate it.
Mark, on behalf of our membership, let me thank you for your time and your expertise. Greatly appreciate you and your team being there in Washington to look out for our counties and our communities. And I thought this was a lot of excellent information today. If you will provide your presentation, your slide deck to us, we will make sure that all of our members get that.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Thank you again. I appreciate it very much.
I appreciate you. Thanks again.
Yes, sir.
And thank you, Judge, for the questions.
All right. Folks, if you still have questions, make sure you send them to cuc@cuc.org, and we'll make sure Mark gets those if you don't want to send them to him directly. But otherwise, unless I see any hands go up, I think we are going to adjourn.
And next month, we're going to have 11:15.
Oh, Judge Sylvester, do you have something?
No, just reminding everybody in, I think 3 weeks, June 10th will be our next get-together, and information on that will be forthcoming. Again, thank you to Mark. Thank you to our CUC staff for all the great things y'all are doing. I know this is our every other year crunch time, and you guys have been fantastic as always. And I know I appreciate you, and I think the rest of the membership does as well. So we'll wrap it up and see y'all in 3 weeks.
Thanks, Judge.
Thank you all.
Staff wanted me to also remind everybody that we're going to have another roundtable on June 10th after our luncheon, and that one will be focused on the Medicare 1115, Medicaid 1115 waiver. A portion of that expires this year, and so we have some experts in that area who are going to be here to talk to you about the ramifications of that expiration, and we'll focus in on our individual communities. Okay, so that'll be a good one too. All right, thanks.
Good deal. Thank you, everyone.